Women in your 30s and beyond, are you tired of being told how to feel? Like all of the products are forced on you? Doesn't it feel like these big companies categorize you when the truth is they don't know you? Listen up. I'm Dr. Jila, an OBGYN and women's health expert. This is my podcast, Her Time, Her Health with Dr. Jila. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled.
So let me ask you, I want to open up for my audience so they know what we're having this conversation about. And what was the moment, when was it that you realized that women's health needed like a new handbook, basically?
Yeah, so I was out in LA. I work for Maria Shriver, and I was sitting with Maria. We were having a salad with the team on the Sunday paper, which is her digital weekly news magazine. And she looked at me and she said, you know, Meghan, you've been a health journalist for 20-ish years. Like, why haven't we had an updated version of like a real lifespan book, you know, looking at women's health from puberty through menopause and beyond? And she's like, we need a manifesto and I want you to write it. So I didn't really clock it at first. I was like, okay, yeah, cool. That sounds amazing. And you're so right. And what I said to Maria is like, we're finally starting to get sex specific research. We have a long way to go, but thankfully we are starting to make tracks. And so I said, you know, what I really want to do is include the information we do have in terms of how women's hearts are different and women's brains are different. Because before this, we had our bodies ourselves, which I still have and love. It's an amazing manifesto in and of itself, but it really focuses on what we now refer to as bikini medicine, right? It's breast health, sexual health, reproductive health, important aspects of women's health, but we know more now. And so that's what I wanted to do with this book.
I love that you said that because, you know, we talk about it in the medical field like all the time. It's not just taking care of the reproductive areas. You have to look at women holistically from head to toe, right? Yeah. And unless you're doing that, you're going to miss the mark on women.
And I would say too, what you're also wanting to do, right, is not compare us to male data, if at all possible. And so I think, you know, like, it's amazing when we can see clinicians who understand that and who are looking at the research to say, okay, what do we know so that, you know, we're not just using the old model, which is to consider women's bodies as just smaller versions of male bodies and apply all the data we know on the research done in men to women, which is unacceptable.
No, it's been for too long. And we are making strides. I think it's slow going, but I think we are headed in the right direction finally.
Yeah.
With a lot of movement and books and, you know, people coming to the table and having these conversations. I think that's where we're going to see things shifting in the next 5 to 10 years. And so writing a book like this, you know, requires a lot of courage, conviction. What personally drove you to want to do this after Maria kind of planted the idea in your mind?
I have spent my career working in health journalism, and what I learned from my early 20s when I started out in this field is that what we as journalists need to do is translate content and topics that can sometimes feel a little inaccessible to us and complex when we haven't gone to medical school, and translate that information into actionable service. I was taught, and I believe that when we can do that as journalists, when we can translate information and then go a step further to make it applicable in a woman's life and help her understand the why, that's when we actually feel inspired to make change, right? I always use the example, like, don't just tell me to eat oatmeal in order to lower my cholesterol. Tell me why it helps to lower my cholesterol. Give me ideas on how I can, you know, on the why, and then how I can start to do this in my life. And so I've always loved doing that. And I think that's the attitude I took for this book as well. I really took a bird's eye view and I said, what do we as women need to know so that we can have better conversations with our healthcare providers, so that we can take care of ourselves and feel confident. You know, I think that's how we really feel empowered as patients, is when we have the knowledge we need and the language we need to talk about our health.
And that is such an important way to look at this, because women are, for too long, they go to their doctor and it's all about, well, diet, nutrition, and exercise. But what does that mean? What does that look like for me on a daily basis? And give me actionable things to do, not just kind of give me a blanket statement and now the the individuals left to go and find that, which, as I know, everything is so overwhelming these days with, information coming at you from every angle. Who do you know? How do you know who to trust? Where to go? What do I follow? What do I not follow? So when you were doing your research for the book, what were the things that you saw that were very surprising to you in terms of, the information being there or not being there? Or you thought there was a lot of data on this, and then when you actually dug in, you're like, wait, actually, we don't have that much about certain things.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest was autoimmunity. I think, so many of the doctors and researchers and other clinicians I interviewed about autoimmunity are just like, I wish we had more answers. And for something that disproportionately impacts women, I mean, I think it's to the tune of 80% of autoimmune conditions happen in women. Gosh, how are we in 2026 and we don't know more? And that is something that frustrates patients, certainly, but it also frustrates our doctors. It frustrates the people who are caring for us as well. And I think that's important to understand. You wish we had more information as well as us, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Because, we do see these tough cases where you think, okay, I think I know what's going on. And you start to treat the patient and it doesn't go the way you think. And so, the last thing I want to do is ping pong them with other providers. Go here, go to the allergist, go to the immunologist, go to the rheumatologist. And every time they come back and they didn't find anything wrong. So those are the things we're trying to minimize and avoid. There's going to be those, outlying cases where they're more difficult. But I think, with everything we have at hand now, with the data, with the newer information, and with all the conversations happening everywhere, we're better able to gauge that information and really hone it in and take care of most, if not all, women, even the difficult ones, I think, the difficult cases per se. But the autoimmune one is really, it gets a lot of women because they think there's actually something wrong with them autoimmune wise, and come to find out, no, actually, it could be just hormonal shifts and changes happening that are underlying everything. And, with a good conversation and a up-to-date individual doctor, you can actually improve your health and get better.
Yeah. I think that's such a great point. Another thing that really surprised me in my research is, and even as a health journalist for many, many years, this wasn't clear to me. Our gynecologic health history actually impacts our heart health later on. So a history of pregnancy complications, let's say you had preeclampsia or gestational diabetes, even if it cleared up after you gave birth, I think a lot of women think, it happened, now it's done, no need to worry, right? Maybe there's not a need to worry, but there is a need to bring it up with your physician so that you can have an assessment about what your heart health risk is, and are you at an increased risk, and should you see a preventive cardiologist, say, earlier than you might otherwise. I think similarly in the menopause transition, hot flashes, we sometimes think, it's common, I'll power through, I'll suffer through. As women, we wear our, our pain as a badge of honor, often, as Dr. Vonda Wright says, which, by the way, she wants us to drop. She wants us to tear off that badge because we need to get treatment for our pain. But actually, a history of hot flashes and recurrent hot flashes impacts the heart. And so, again, it's not to scare women, but it is to say, wow, I need to be bringing up these aspects of my personal medical health history to my doctors going forward, so that I can prevent, something as it relates to heart disease later on. So I thought that was surprising.
It is, because even, I've been in the field for over 25 years, delivered, thousands of babies. And I can assure you that women with the preeclampsia history during their pregnancies, or even gestational diabetes, didn't understand when we told them, listen, this is something we're going to have to keep an eye on, because it can determine you're at a higher risk of developing cardiovascular disease as well as metabolic disorder later in life. But again, they're 20, 30 years old, having a baby. They're not really paying attention at that point. But I think it's getting more commonplace for them to actually know their medical history and walk in well versed and ready to have a conversation, which is part of why I think your book is so timely and so important. Is it gives women the authority to walk in
Yes.
with everything at hand and say, this is what I have, this is what's going on, and this is my medical history. Are you going to be able to help me?
That is one of the highest compliments I could receive, because honestly, I have felt that personally with the information I now have after my reporting. For another example, I had my annual gynecologic appointment, and I said, nobody's ever done a lifetime risk of breast cancer with me. And so I did it myself. I took the quiz online. I did the Tyrer-Cuzick model. This is my score. What do you think, doc? And he looked at the score, and then he looked at my last mammogram report, and he saw that I have extremely dense breast tissue and a score. And he said, yeah, I think it's time for an MRI. And so I felt like, oh my goodness, this is what it means to be empowered. This is what it means to advocate for ourselves. But I was only able to do that because I had the information.
Correct.
And so I think that we're talking a lot about how we have to advocate for ourselves and feel empowered. And that's great. Yes, that's true. But I think we have to take the next step and say, okay, how do we do that? Which is by educating ourselves. And then that's what leads to those appointments where you feel confident and you also walk out feeling like, I felt really proud of myself.
Yeah, as you should, because listen, that's a critical thing right there, is to be evaluated. We have all of this technology. So why are we not putting it to good use and screening women earlier and earlier? We know diseases are happening earlier and earlier. You have a modality to find something at its earliest stage. Why are we not using that? And so women need to understand the conversation has to shift. You need to be in charge of your healthcare, and your healthcare provider is guiding you along that path.
Yeah. And I learned something else, which I think is really important, which is we would never show up to a tax appointment to get our taxes done without bringing our information, right? I bring like a little binder of, all the tax stuff that you get throughout the year. And I show up to that appointment prepared. And I think sometimes we show up to our doctor's visits not prepared. We just think, oh, they've got all the records. They'll know what to do. And we hand over, that job to the people who care for us. And it's no, we have to take ownership. We have to show up prepared. We have to come with a list of our symptoms. I got a great tip from a doctor that I included in the book, which is not only write down a list of symptoms, but organize that list in order of priority in terms of how much those symptoms impact your life and everyday activities, so that it helps your doctor say, okay, look, I understand we might not have time to go over all of these. This is what feels most important to me. What do you think? And I think that's really important as well. It's one more thing that we can do before that appointment to help make the most of it.
And again, it's so critical that I see women coming into my office, 30 patients a day sometimes, and they're leaving it up to me. Oh, I'm here for my annual. That's it. That's all they want. And I have to pull it out of them. How's this? How is your sexual health? How is everything? Oh, well, I mean, that's a whole different ball. No, that is a conversation for now.
Yes.
And I think women have been so kind of, traumatized, or maybe, it's just been such a taboo to talk about these topics for so long that now they're being given permission to kind of talk about it and bring it up. And then sometimes they're still being dismissed. So then they feel kind of like, I should have never said anything. I should have just gone in for my mammogram and my pap smear and been done with it. Where we know that isn't correct. And if that's, I think, what's happening, then I think that's where you need to advocate and find yourself another provider who's willing to give you the time to address your concerns. In your research and everything, were you still finding women who are being dismissed and all those,
Oh, absolutely. Medical gaslighting is real. And I interviewed a leading expert on the topic because I really wanted women to feel seen, to feel like they're not alone if this is happening to them, to feel like if they're being dismissed, if they don't feel seen, if they don't feel heard, that it's unfortunate, but you're not making it up. If you feel this way, it is probably happening. And then trying to give women really actionable tips to do to counter some of that. I think one of the tips is that I think is very practical is bring someone with you. You can bring a best friend, a husband, a partner, a sister with you into the exam room, and say, look, this is my person. I want them here to help speak up for me, to help give you context in terms of what's normal and what's not for this person. And I think that's something we should all feel empowered to do.
Right. I can tell you, I mean, I was in a group practice of like 6 doctors, and when women came for the annual checkup with a husband, it was like, really? You need to bring your husband for your pap smear? It didn't make sense. And that was how it was approached. Right?
Yeah.
And so there's number one, like you're just putting up a wall for these women already before even them getting in the room with you.
Yeah. And why the judgment? Maybe that woman
She needed it.
She needed it. Maybe she's dealing with past trauma and she needs some extra support, and I think even if you're a woman who does that and you feel, I think as women, we're very intuitive. We can feel that judgment, and that can really be it's just so sad and disappointing. And I think it's really important, because this is your health, to just say, okay, I'm going to feel sad, but I'm also going to bring that person into the room with me, because this is what I need.
It's funny. One of my patients, like a few months ago, it was her first visit with me, and she brought her husband and she made him wait outside. After we had our conversation and, we had a plan of action, and I could tell like she let her guard down. I said, can we bring in your husband now too, so we can have him as a part of this conversation? And she hadn't even thought about it. She was ready to go. And she was like, oh yeah, if you think that's going to help. I said, I think it's going to help quite a bit, actually. And I realized by bringing in the husband, he was the one who made her come in.
How amazing that you clocked that, and that you inspired that to happen. I think that's the goal, is to have doctors who can really, who are not only just listening to what we say, but kind of feeling what's not being said. And, that's the dream, I think, yeah.
I mean, I knew something was off because, she had hesitated a little bit. And when the husband came in, he told me, basically she had been medically gaslit for years.
Yeah.
Years. And she almost didn't come to the visit because she felt this was going to be the same kind of conversation.
Totally. You're reminding me right now of something else I learned in my reporting that I really didn't know. And it's largely because I live in a normal, quote unquote, quote, size body, but weight stigma keeps far too many women from going to see a doctor. And understandably so. I mean, we live in a society where people who live in larger bodies are discriminated against outright and subliminally all the time, right? And so of course, and I have a section in my book about how to navigate this, because I think that's another area in which women are just like, I don't want the whole conversation to focus on my weight and how I can lose weight and what I need to be doing more of when I'm coming in for pain with sex or something totally that doesn't really have that much to do with my weight, or if anything. And so I think that's also really important, is that if you're living in a larger body, you're not going to the doctor because you're afraid of that, there are things you can do. You can say at the start of a visit, I would love for this appointment to not focus on my weight. Can we talk about other things? You can actually ask to be weighed at the end of your visit. I think a lot of women just fear stepping on the scale at the start of an appointment. And if you're not pregnant, or, there might not be a need at every single visit to get weighed. And so I think that's really important to be talking about as well.
Talking about that. Yeah, because, it's intimidating walking into these visits. And I think more and more midlife women after reproductive age, where they're not there for their obstetric visit now. Now they're there for their annual checkup, which really is more than that now. It's a preventative health visit, basically, which is where we want women's health to head, is prevention rather than reactive treatment once disease sets in. So, it's so scary for them to come in. And the gynecologist is like the worst place to come. Like, I'm sorry, but like between that and the dentist, I don't know which one of us is worse. And when we're like, you're both right there. I'm like, I know, but I think I'm nicer. So just come on in and we'll work through it. But why do you think midlife is like such a pivotal yet overlooked chapter in women's life?
Yeah, it's such a great point, right? And something I really, again, learned in reporting this book is like we have this window of opportunity. I interviewed Dr. Lisa Larkin, who said, if I see you in your 40s and 50s, that is when we can start to talk about changes that are going to prevent you from developing all these conditions later on in life. But it feels like such a catch, right? Because in our 30s, 40s, 50s, and in that midlife period, we're so busy. We're dealing with, demanding work. We've got children perhaps we're still caring for. We've got aging parents we're caring for. We've got menopause to contend with, where all these symptoms are coming up and we don't even feel like we're in our same body anymore. And we're trying to keep our heads above water, and we're treading water is often what it can feel like. But yet it's so important to make the appointments, get your regular visits in, know what cancer screenings you need, and stay on top of that. Like one of my dearest friends, I said to her, we were on a walk, and I said, when was the last time you had a skin check? Just your annual, skin exam, to check for skin cancer. And she said, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And this is common. And I don't mean to say it so anybody feels judged. It's just like, you need to prioritize yourself. We as midlife women need to prioritize ourselves and not just go to the doctor when something's drastically wrong, but go to the doctor to have great conversations about what I can do now to optimize my health so that I feel great later.
Right. Because, a lot of the diseases that women will face in later life started in those 30s, 40s, and 50s. They were brewing under the surface.
Yeah.
And they rear their ugly heads with blood pressure problems and hypercholesteremia and cardiovascular disease and hip fractures in your 60s and 70s. And so, it didn't just happen overnight. It's been kind of happening on a much smaller, quieter level, and now it's showing its impact. What do you think? What are some of the myths around perimenopause and menopause that you just really are like, this needs to go? Like, we need to dismantle these myths and, stop having women get scared from hormone therapy and perimenopause.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a lot of myths around hormone therapy that luckily, for anyone who's in midlife, we're learning more about it. Thankfully, we've got a lot of doctors and researchers and other clinicians who are taking to social media and really becoming health educators. I don't see someone with a medical degree who is menopause certified as an influencer. That woman, and usually it's women, is a health educator, and so I think luckily there's not a whole lot of myths anymore. I don't think about like hormone therapy causes breast cancer. Maybe it's still a little bit pervasive, but I think you all have been doing such a great job in trying to, talk about facts that we need to know. That said, I do think there's still a lot of questions about hormone therapy in particular. As I am out in the world now talking about this book and in audiences, people they always want to know. I'm usually in conversation with a doctor. They always want to know from that doctor, when is it too early to start menopause therapy? When is it too late? What do I need to know? And so I think the biggest, I think from my view, the biggest myth about menopause therapy is that there's one way to do it. Everyone has to be on it, whereas really the truth is that it's quite personalized. It should be very personalized. Mm-hmm. And in an ideal world, you would find a menopause specialist or a doctor who is really up on the latest research when it comes to menopause therapy to really have a conversation about how it fits into your life and whether it does.
Right, right. And I think you said it. It needs to be a conversation had by every woman and their healthcare provider. And that's it. Bottom line, what you decide to do with that is different for each woman and their journey and how they're going to approach it. But just having the conversation is where it's at, I think. And by having resources such as your book and everybody else out there having these conversations in big rooms in front of people, that's how I think we are able to, at least nationally and then even globally, get the word out. We're like, okay, there is something here that needs to be, discussed with a provider, with my doctor, whoever it may be, and see, does it work for me? Am I a candidate? Is it something I want to think about and go forward? Yeah. What I'm seeing is a lot of younger women now coming to me saying, I don't have any symptoms, but I don't want to get there. I don't want to be like that. So what do I do? How do we approach this? give me like a roadmap. And so that's really what we work on with them is this is what can happen. This is what it is. I want you to look for this, but these are the lifestyle modifications we're going to start implementing today
Yeah. That's
to help
awesome.
you. I'm like, this is what we got to do right now. And they're happy with that. They want that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it speaks to, the education piece as well, so there is the section on menopause hormone therapy in my book. What I really aim to do is give women facts so that before we have that appointment to talk about hormone therapy, we have a baseline knowledge so that we're not, because most of us don't get an hour plus with our menopause doctors, unless it's a concierge model. We are likely not getting as much time as we would like, nor our doctors aren't getting as much time with us as they would like, But I think, again, it comes back to the more knowledge we have going in, the more we can make sure the questions we ask and the conversation we have is really personalized and tailored to us. It's not a good use of your time with your doctor to say, tell me about the Women's Health Initiative. Right. What do I need to know about that? Because there is just so much to unpack. And so if you go in knowing the basics, then you can say, okay, I still have a uterus. I'm having hot flashes, night sweats, major mood swings. I know that if I'm going to take estrogen, I'm also going to need progesterone. What do you think? Am I a candidate? And then you just have such a different conversation.
Right.
Than you would if you're just like, tell me about hormone therapy.
Right. It's like, okay, so where do you want me to start with that?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then what do you think, in terms of the book speaks to thriving, right? Like not just surviving through this midlife shift. What does actually that thriving look like for women today?
Yeah. I mean, I think as it relates to menopause, another myth actually is that menopause is all doom and gloom. It's just terrible. And I think really what it means to thrive through midlife is to remember that menopause comes with some major upsides. I think if we are caring for ourselves and we're getting the treatment we need for various symptoms that we have, my gosh, menopause, no more periods, no more worrying about birth control. Not only that, but so many women in menopause really just feel like, oof, like I feel more like myself than ever before. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm stepping into my own. I feel like me 2.0, like the upgraded version. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important to remember that. And then to, I think if there's anything wrong with us, symptoms or some kind of disease that we're not getting adequately treated for, that's the surefire way to feel like you're not thriving. And so I think really, getting the care we need to help us manage symptoms, not just powering through, not just keeping quiet because we're ashamed, is really the first step. Because then when we can have conversations with our doctors, get the care we need, that's when we can start to feel better and then start making even more changes to, thrive now and later.
Mm-hmm. And how do you feel mental health, community, and purpose influence physical health? And how do we acknowledge that with women?
Yeah. I mean, it's also deeply tied together, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it is important to note that women disproportionately suffer from depression, anxiety, trauma. I think these are really important things to name and to understand what some of the symptoms are, again, so we get help if needed. Community is... Think about it. We've been living in community for so long. And I think with our high-tech society, we can get a little lasered in on our phones and not stay open to all the potential for connection that's around us. But there's so much research on how friendship and feeling like we're in community, feeling like our lives have purpose, improves all health outcomes.
Okay. So with all of that, right, what do you think, like what gives you the most hope right now in terms of women's health and the movement that's happening?
Yeah. I mean, I think first and foremost, we are finally starting to study women's bodies. There are more women at the table deciding what gets researched, which I think is fantastic. There are more, like we talked about before, female physicians, clinicians, researchers who are taking to social media to say, this is what we all need to know. I think that's amazing. And I think this collective conversation we're having about menopause, which used to be in the shadows and so taboo, is really transforming how all of us feel about it. I know personally at almost 47, I can't go out whether it's to dinner with our husbands, whether it's on a walk with a girlfriend, whether it's playing pickleball, which I love. And we're all talking about menopause, and I think that is such a great thing. It's such a positive.
Mm-hmm. So one last question for you. Fast forward 10 years for me, what does the ideal future of women's healthcare look like?
We have more information about our bodies. We have more research to the point where books like the one that I just wrote need a total update because we know that much more. And we as women are more educated about our bodies. Our young girls get the education they deserve about all their organs and specifics about how sex works, not the, like vague health class information that most of us received, and really it means that we can feel empowered. That education and knowledge we have means that we go into every interaction with someone who cares for us, feeling confident and like we're going to get the care we deserve.
Thank you so much, Meghan, for being here with us today. I know the audience is going to love hearing this conversation. Where can they find you and follow you for more information?
Yeah, you can find me at newrulesofwomenshealth.com, and I'm on Instagram at Meghan Rabbitt.
Great. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I loved our conversation.